Hello everyone and welcome. This is a live television and virtual Citizens Town Hall. This means some of our guests tonight will be physically present here in Lagos and Abuja studios, while others will join us virtually on Zoom network. This town hall focuses on voting amidst COVID-19, organized by Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement, Yaga Africa, and other civil society organizations in collaboration with Channels Television. Before we take a deep dive into the analysis and discussions of tonight, here is a message from the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, Mr. Samson Itodo.
Good evening, viewers. I hope you're staying safe out there. My name is Samson Itodo, and I lead the Yaga Africa team. In the last few months, the world has been brought to its knees by the deadly coronavirus pandemic, and its rippling effect is felt by most of the best and the largest economies in the world. National elections have been postponed in some countries, while others defied the odds and conducted elections amidst the COVID-19. Ahead of the September 19 and October 10, 2020 governorship elections in Edo and Ondo State, INEC released a policy on conducting elections in the context of COVID-19. This policy outlines how officials and staff of the Commission will successfully conduct elections during this pandemic. It is therefore important for key stakeholders like INEC, security agencies, CSOs, political parties, citizens, and the media to engage in discussions on the practicalities of conducting elections amidst the COVID-19 without compromising public health and electoral integrity. This is why we have convened this Citizens Town Hall to build consensus with all relevant stakeholders, including you, on safeguarding public health and electoral integrity in the forthcoming elections. More importantly, tonight's town hall will ensure that your voice is heard on the INEC policy on elections in the period of this COVID-19. Remember, watching the vote cannot be a citizens-led movement if you do not exercise the power of your office, that is the office of the citizen. And this town hall will not be successful if you only watch and keep your opinions to yourself. I therefore invite you to participate actively by sending SMS to 0903 800 7744 or send an email to watchingthevote@yaga.org, or simply join the conversation through our Facebook page and our Twitter handle @Yaga, or join the conversation with the hashtag voting amidst COVID-19. Present at this town hall this evening are representatives of key democratic institutions and citizens across the world, both online and offline. We're also pleased to have the governors of Edo and Ondo join us this evening for this important conversation. Please reach out to your friends, invite them to watch and participate. This town hall is also streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. Before we delve into tonight's conversation in earnest, I'd like to specially thank the EU SDGN partners, namely Albino Foundation, International Press Center, the Nigerian Women Trust Fund, Clean Foundation, the European Center for Electoral Support, the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, the BBC Media Action, the Institute for Media and Society, and Premium Time Center for Investigative Journalism. Many thanks to Channels TV for the partnership and the support to make this happen. I'd like to specially thank also the EU delegation in Nigeria for making this possible and providing the support. On behalf of all of us, I say welcome to the Citizens Town Hall on voting amidst COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I guess with a message from our partners, Yaga Africa, we can get started. Shall we, everyone? I'm your moderator tonight on this town hall. I'm Sean Kimbaloye. The outbreak of COVID-19 has come with a lot of disruption. Governance, the economy, religion, and many other aspects of our lives have seen one adjustment or the other in the past months. As the fight against this invisible enemy continues, timelines have been altered, but life must go on. Now, there are more pressing needs to seek innovative ways of doing things to buffer the impact of COVID-19 on various aspects of our lives. In Nigeria, 2 staggered elections are expected this year. INEC says these elections will hold. They are in Edo and Ondo states, the governorship elections in those states. For Edo State, here are some of the timelines you need to know. Let's begin with the situation of things as regarding COVID-19 in Nigeria. For COVID-19 in Nigeria, let's quickly show you the dashboard and give you an understanding of where we are. Over 10,000 cases in Nigeria. And in some of the states, of course, you know, in Edo and Ondo State, we'll give you the details of what is happening in those states. For Edo State, here are the timelines and the key statistics you need to know. The election is scheduled for September the 19th, 2020. The end of tenure of the incumbent governor is November the 11th. The state has 336 confirmed cases with 14 deaths as at the end of 3rd of June 2020. However, the key numbers are a bit different in Ondo State. The election is scheduled in Ondo State for the 10th of October 2020. The tenure of the incumbent governor ends in February 2021. For the coronavirus situation there, 28 confirmed cases in Ondo State, 3 active and 4 deaths as at 3rd of June 2020. The electoral process on one hand, electoral integrity, election security, and boosting public confidence are another kettle of fish altogether. For these elections to hold without compromising health and other standards, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has issued a set of guidelines. Let's run you through them quickly. It's now a must that face mask shall be mandatory at all polling units and all election locations. Also, the polling unit layout shall also be redesigned in compliance with social distancing and general hygiene conduct. There shall be a 2-tier queuing system at the polling unit. Now, things are a bit changed in terms of the timing. Polls shall now commence at 8:30 a.m. and it will close at 2:30 p.m. Now, there shall be also periodic disinfection of chairs, tables, and work areas, as well as adequate ventilation at the polling unit. Another policy that INEC has brought out is the use of personal protective equipment, PPE, and other safety materials. This, they say, is mandatory for the staff that will be working for this election at all polling units. At the close of polls, polling unit staff shall ensure that materials are properly disinfected, carefully packaged, and the used PPE are hygienically packaged and disposed of afterwards. Now to the discussion, everyone. Let me introduce to you our guest tonight on the program. I have in our Abuja studio the NMA president, Dr. Henry Ewunonu, and on our virtual, thank you so much, Dr. Ewunonu, for coming on tonight. We have the governor of Edo State, Governor Godwin Obaseki, who joins us. Thank you so much, Governor Obaseki, for coming on tonight. Also, I have some guests who I'm going to be introducing in the course of the program. Let me perhaps begin with the governor of Edo State, Governor Godwin Obaseki. You are the chief executive officer. We know that you have shown your interest in running in this election. But first and foremost, your duty, you are the one managing and spearheading the issue of coronavirus and how you are fighting it. And as the chief security officer of your state, do you think your state is ready for an election as slated by INEC?
Thank you very much, Sheon. We are ready for elections this year, gubernatorial elections. Fortunately, it's going to be taking place on the 19th of September. And from the epidemiological survey we have done in Edo State, we believe that the first round of the epidemic will peak about the third week in June. And then subsequently, we hope that we don't have reoccurrences. And that way we should be able to manage the public health situation in our state before the elections on the 19th of September. But we've done quite a lot of things to ensure that we secure the health of our United States. As you talked about, or you spoke about earlier when you were making the introductions, as of today, we have 336 cases. And it's significant to note that these cases, I mean, almost 50% of these cases were discovered in less than for the strategy is to ensure that we screen, test, and treat our citizens. I make it bold to say that we have perhaps one of the largest testing capacities in the state, in the country today. We have 3 testing centers in Edo. We have screened in excess of 300,000 of our citizens in the last 6 to 8 weeks. We have collected over 2,200 samples, and that is why we're seeing a very high number of reported cases. What is instructive about this epidemic is that from the first index case on March 23rd, it took us 60 days to get to our first 100 cases. But within 10 days, we moved from 100 cases to 200 cases. And within 7 days, we've moved from 200 cases to 300 cases. We expect to see such increases up to our primaries. But the important thing about what we're doing is we are being transparent. We are being upfront with the challenge. And we are developing responses, isolation centers, treatment centers, to make sure we cope. But most importantly, we are emphasizing risk communication, talking to our people, ensuring that we communicate as best as we can, using town criers, using electronic media, using billboards to transmit the message of social distancing, the message that people should now accept responsibility for their health. We're proud to say that we're believe the first state to make using of face masks compulsory in our state.
Governor Obaseki, sorry, if I may quickly butt in, a lot of people agree that governance and every aspect of our lives should continue, and we should find the best ways by which we can maneuver or get ourselves out of the way of coronavirus. But for Edo State, for example, health-wise, the policy INEC has put in place, first and foremost, has Edo State peaked? Have you gotten to that point in the curve that you think you have peaked in the cases that you're monitoring?
We have not peaked. We believe that we will peak about the 28th of June. That's what the model is telling us. And therefore, this is perhaps the most tenuous time in the curve, where we are seeing cases double now, almost every 7 to 10 days. And this is why we are taking extra measures, particularly in terms of risk communication, to ensure that we do the things we need to do to keep our people safe. Yes, Sheung, you are right. COVID-19 is here to stay. We've got to learn to live with it. And therefore, even after it peaks in Edo State, people will have to live with it. So what we are doing is to try and emphasize the message that yes, the population is young. You have a lot of young people who will have COVID-19 but will be asymptomatic. That is not the problem. The problem are those people who are vulnerable, those who have underlying medical conditions, who could have lived otherwise. But if we don't take care of them and they get infected, we may lose them.
Okay, so let's hear from the Nigerian Medical Association. They are the professional when it comes to the issues of health. And let's turn to Dr. Henry Ewunalu. I introduced you as the president of the NMA, but I know that you are the head of the advocacy unit of the NMA. Dr. Ewunalu, give us a sense. In Edo State, we have 336 confirmed cases as at today, and in Ondo State, confirmed cases are just 28. From the point of view of the NMA as a professional body, can we go for election in those two states?
Thank you, Sheung, and thank you, Yaga Africa, for inviting us. Like you have corrected yourself, Henry Ewunalu is not the president of the Nigerian Medical Association. I'm here to represent Professor Innocent Ojaemenai, our new president. Now, total or partial easing of any lockdown during a health emergency is informed by science. Scientific evidence is substantial evidence of flattening of that curve. And we cannot talk of that without having tested the appropriate percentage of the population. We have not done well in the number of people we have tested. So all those indices will not apply here. So the other hand, what will subsist is the resolve of the government and the people that though we don't have the resources needed to do what is appropriate, but we shall live. And how is that done? By complying with the directives. That is how that is done. Yes, they might not have tested substantial proportion of their population, but if they resolve that those who have symptoms related to the case definition for COVID-19, please stay apart, don't come near. Present yourself to the hospital, not the pooling center, not the pooling units. And we provide all that will be necessary to ensure physical distancing, to make sure that the air and somebody is breathing out, another person doesn't take it in, to make sure that we keep our hands disinfected, not just clean. If we do all this as per protocol, we can bypass and actually succeed. Okay. So if you follow the statistics of testing, perhaps that election will not hold.
Wow. So if you look at the policy that INEC has released, the guidelines INEC has released for this election, and if you look at what the PTF and the federal government, the way and manner in which they're going about it, religious centers are still not open. Do you think that everything is all right by INEC policy? Any fear for you, any concern for you in all of these policies? No face masks, no voting, the issue
INEC
of...
for thinking health when they're rolling out this, that policy. But Shem, if you go to the various agencies of government, their libraries and the shelves, you will see several policies gathering dust. I'll be more worried if INEC will promise the nation that they will do within the best of the ability and the availability of resources, ensure that all they have done, all they have stated they will do. But I'm worried about some things. For instance, they said face masks will be provided only to election officials in the village, in the rural areas and so on. And you want people to come out. If you really want, we have been complaining about voter apathy. People are not coming to police stations. Maybe this would have been an opportunity to incentivize coming out to vote. I have looked at the percentage of voter turnout in 2016, the last time governorship election took place in these states. In Edo, it was about 550,000 something. In Ondo, 230-something thousand. Today, a face mask, cloth face mask is about 100 naira. Can INEC ask for funds to provide face masks for every voter? Secondly, they said hand sanitizers will be provided. There will be provision for disinfecting the polling units, the infrastructure, perhaps furniture they will use, and so on. I am worried. Why am I worried? Provision of these services may be done through the contract system, where nobody supervises anybody given a job in this country. So, would the appropriate strength of the chemical be used? Who will supply the hand sanitizers? Will there be somebody to guarantee that they have the correct, appropriate strength of alcohol? People use, in the market today, you see all sorts of chemicals people have produced and called hand sanitizers, and these cannot sanitize anything. So, INEC, thank you for the policy, but implementation is key.
Okay, great. I understand now that we have Mr. Festus Okoye now is since joined us. He's the head of voter education and publicity at INEC. Thank you so much, Mr. Okoye, for joining us. You've heard what Dr. Ewunono has said. From some of the question is, how practical is some of these policies that you have brought in place? And it raised a big question. Are you going to provide free masks for voters, for those who are in the rural areas who may not be able to afford these face masks? You said no face mask, no voting. Are you afraid that some of them may be disenfranchised?
INEC Director in charge of electoral operations, Professor Kebano, has joined us, and I believe that question should appropriately go to him. Let him deal with the issue of face mask and of all some people have this particular.
In fact, I think that there seems to be some trouble with the audio. Let's see if Professor Obianu can come on stream. If Professor Obianu can come on stream and answer to that question, whether or not INEC will be providing free face masks, because INEC has said it is compulsory, no face mask, no voting. Professor Obianu, good to see you. What are your thoughts about this? Is INEC providing free face mask?
And, as a country, I don't even think it is auspicious to do so. Let's look at the problem of
Prof, apologies. Let's hold on so that we can control some of the technical issues that we are experiencing as regarding the audio. If I may like to tell our virtual audience that and speakers to mute the volume of their TV set. Let me bring in Professor Adele Jenadu into the conversation, and Mr. Larry Arugundade, who are in our Lagos studio. Thank you. It's good to see you, gentlemen, for coming on tonight.
Thank you very much.
Prof, you have a major concern about INEC policy. Do you?
Well, I think the policy as spelled out already, which I have looked at, is quite comprehensive. It may not necessarily cover the field, but it is quite comprehensive. And I think what we need to explain or to emphasize is that the responsibility for conducting elections at any time, not just during this COVID pandemic, it's not just INEC alone. It is a shared responsibility between INEC and the citizens. And what INEC is doing now is to engage the citizens and get them involved in the process and to be committed. I don't think that should go into INEC providing face masks for every voter. The lockdown has been going on for about 2-3 weeks now. People are supposed to have masks if they are going out. So it is not be that election is only the period where you now give them face masks because they are going to. The assumption is that they already have face masks.
What about those who do not have? Well, those who in the rural area who cannot afford it?
They have responsibility, not just INEC. There are other people who can help give them the face mask. the private sector, other work. INEC cannot provide, because the society as a whole has the responsibility because they have a stake in the elections.
All right. Prof,
and you can't be full-fed all the time.
We'll need to take a break.
Yeah.
But when we come back, it does look like there are genuine concerns about how this is going to play out. And the essence of this town hall is to resolve some of these issues so that we can have a perfect election. We have our guests tonight, virtually and present physically in our Lagos and Abuja studio. We take a break. We'll also get to reaction from the streets in Edo and Ondo State. Don't go anywhere. It's the town hall on election conduct amid COVID-19. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone. You're back on stream with us on these Citizens Town Hall on conducting elections in the COVID-19 era. It's a new normal, a lot of people call it, because we're not used to that kind of situation where you have to mask yourself up across the street. You are moving. You cannot even greet people properly. No hugs again. What kind of world do we belong to again? Because it's called coronavirus. But INEC says elections will continue, and that's the reason why we all gathered virtually tonight. Let me show you. Our guests are seated here in Lagos studio virtually. We have guests also in our virtual audience. They're there. And also in our Abuja studio, we'll have guests there who are discussing this matter and the way forward for Nigeria. Professor Adele Jinadu was talking to us earlier. Let me allow you to land on that thought. You said INEC cannot provide face mask. But what about those who are not rich enough to buy a face mask, who cannot afford it? Don't forget, there are some people who cannot afford 1,000 naira per month.
My point is not that INEC cannot provide, but that we also, as citizens, have a responsibility to assist INEC in doing its work and making the elections take place. It is not feasible for INEC to provide masks for every voter. But there are citizen groups all over the state who can assist in doing that as part of their own contribution to the electoral process. So don't just let us all put it on the table of INEC. And I think it's also important to emphasize that COVID and elections is not just a health matter. There are other political considerations that we need to take into context in making the election successful. For example, the situation in Ondo and Edo State have been polluted by intra-party rivalry, which will spill over into the elections. So beyond the health concerns, how do we now manage that concern, which has always been there in our politics? That situation, yeah. They are not just going to, the problem is not just simply the health issue, but the political environment in which this is taking place.
All right. So, Mr. Arogunade, what are your thoughts? I saw that you were nodding your head at some point. The worry is face mask, INEC said, is compulsory. Should INEC make it compulsory?
Well, I think they should make it compulsory because of the situation we find ourselves, the health situation. We don't know what ailments anybody might have. And so it's in line with the current situation about the health circumstances for INEC to request that people should wear, face masks just to ensure that there is minimal protection of citizens. Now, on the question of whether INEC should buy, I would have said it would have been much more ideal if INEC had such resources to be able to produce this. And I feel that this is also one of the signs of failure of governance in our society, because by now we ought to have had companies producing face masks. And we're talking about election in 2 states. It's not as if we're going to have election all over Nigeria. So it's something that INEC could possibly still look at. Because now, but the other side of this issue of face masks too is the possibility of abuse, really. And I think that there are a number of issues that this policy guideline didn't envisage, and it's good that we're having this town hall discussion so that INEC could also fine-tune a lot of things.
What area is that? Because
even in the area of face masks, for example, there might have to be a guideline to say that the face mask must not bear the insignia of political parties, because this could also be an avenue for for vote buying. And as a matter of fact, why I said it would have been ideal for INEC to get this face mask, you are not even sure whether these politicians will not begin to seal money inside the face masks to induce voters. So it's a reality. So they must proceed from this policy, which is good that they have something for us to discuss, to also give some other specific guidelines so that the process of face mask itself is not turned into a kind of politicking.
All right. So let me get Professor Ebiano. I'd like to plead with our virtual participants that they should turn off or turn down the volume of their TV set if they are participating. If Professor Ebiano is with us, because Mr. Okoye said Professor Ebiano is the one who can answer this question. And if Professor Ebiano is here, Professor Ebiano, you've heard some of the issues that people have raised in this matter, and their worries and the concern. Should we even be considering doing an election at this time? That's one of the questions that one of the person on the street in Edo State raised.
Yeah, I think we should hold the elections. First of all, if you look at the incidence of COVID-19, in the two states, we don't think that it has gotten to a point where we can risk, for example, a constitutional crisis by not holding the election. So I think we're in a situation, actually, taking everything together, where we can hold the election. Of course, that is why we have this policy. It's a realization that COVID-19 is a major challenge, and INEC is trying to respond to that challenge. And if you read the policy in details, you can see the extent to which we have gone to set out the broad thinking of the Commission on how to deal with this problem. Of course, we'll then move from the policy to specific regulations and guidelines. And, that's what we are finalizing this week. Right. So, for example, the point about face masks bearing insignia, we've put that already in our regulations, because that will constitute a campaign, and therefore it is not allowed. On whether INEC should provide face masks, look, the number of registered voters for the two states is about 4.038 million. Now, if we were going to provide the face mask at 100 naira per mask, you are looking at 403 million naira. Should INEC be spending that kind of money on face masks when, voluntary associations, NGOs, and so on can do that? Indeed, elections apart, I think by now the country should have mounted a major campaign of voluntary donation of face masks. People in the rural areas who cannot afford it should be able to get these face masks from, public-spirited individuals and philanthropists. In Mali, for example, it was a private sector that organized to provide masks for voters. So I don't think INEC is in a position to do so. And even if INEC had the resources, I don't think it is a good idea for the Commission, to provide those face masks.
Prof, you are saying that we should bury the idea of INEC providing face masks. For a lot of our viewers who do not know, this is the man who is usually in charge of logistics at INEC. So this is the go-to man in terms of provision of logistics at INEC. So, Prof, we should bury the idea, we should forget the idea of INEC providing face masks, because the consideration is coming for the poorest of the poor in the society. For example, people are afraid that the turnout of voter is always below 40%. In Edo and Ondo State, even in Nigeria, largely voter turnout has always gone down. And if INEC is saying no face mask, no voting, are you afraid that this may affect voter turnout?
I don't think so. Like I said, I think this is one area, as Professor Jinadu said, where as a country we should come together and make sure that people, and this is election apart, so that people who cannot afford face masks should get those masks from public-spirited individuals and voluntary organizations. This is not just about election. It is a problem that goes beyond the election. And the fact that there are still some people today who cannot afford and do not wear masks should be a cause for concern, even without the election. That's the point I'm making.
All right, so let's, we have Governor Obaseki is still with us, and one of the reasons why we wanted the chief executives of some of these states to talk to us tonight is to know, as a chief, not as candidate, but as chief security officers of their different states, whether or not we are able to conduct elections in those states. Let's bring back Governor Godwin Obaseki and perhaps get perhaps a final word from you on this one. You've heard it. In Edo State, for example, is the state government willing to provide free face masks for a voter, anybody who is willing to vote?
Certainly, since we made the use of face masks compulsory in the state, we've ensured that through local governments, churches, religious organizations, different societies, face masks have been made available to citizens. We will still continue to ensure compliance because studies show that use of face masks are an effective means of curtailing the spread of the virus. In the area of security, Edo is located uniquely in the country. It's at the heart of the country. Traffic has to flow through from the west to the east, to the south, and to the north. And we're very cognizant of that and have ensured that we provide adequate security across the state, utilizing a very comprehensive security architecture, which incorporates the vigilante groups in the local communities, with our state public volunteer workforce, who are under the guidance of the new community policing arrangement by the Inspector General, who eventually reports to the DPOs in the various local governments. So we have a very comprehensive security architecture that cascades down to the communities where voting will take place. And, from my vantage position today, I am satisfied that we can provide the security required to conduct elections in Edo State.
So we are good to go in your state, Governor Obaseki. Isn't that you're giving us a 100% guarantee? Because a lot of people wonder, when we're talking about elections, voting day is not only about elections. The pre-election stage is there. Things are getting heated in your state. So you are giving, as a chief executive officer, you're saying, look, go ahead, elections can hold. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I've gone through this process before. It was more heated in 2016. And, incidentally, there was not one incident, not one life was lost in 2016 when I participated in the gubernatorial elections. Things will be much calmer this time around because of the limitations to movement as a result of COVID-19. Most of the electioneering, most of the campaigning will be done electronically. And don't forget that this is, I am still in office. I'm an incumbent running for elections. So we have a lot of traction. We have a lot of understanding with the people of the state. And I'll be very, very surprised if you have incidents in the state.
All right. Governor Godwin Obaseki, let us allow you to enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for talking to us. We've gotten some confidence that things will be okay in Edo State for a lot of the voters who are willing to vote. Let's talk about legal issues, which is also a very important one. Let me bring in Dr. Sam Amadi. He joins us from our Abuja studio, and Mr. Festus Okoye. He's a lawyer and the National Commissioner of INEC in charge of voter publicity and awareness. Thank you so much, Mr. Okoye. I guess this is a period where you can talk. You pushed it to Professor Ebiano the other time. And the big question is, for those who think, Mr. Okoye, that maybe the election should have been shifted, that INEC perhaps took a gamble by saying it was going to conduct election in a health emergency. Don't forget, election is not only the election day. Primaries will be conducted. We have not picked just yet in the coronavirus handling of the situation. That's what the federal government is saying to us. For this, legally speaking, shouldn't have INEC thought about shifting the elections?
The commission has not had any discussion relating to shifting or postponing this particular election, and we are not likely going to have such a discussion. This is because if you look at the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is the fundamental law of the land, Section 178, subsection 2, makes it very clear that the Independent National Electoral Commission shall not conduct the election in any of those 2 states not earlier than 150 days and not later, shall conduct not earlier than 150 days and not later than 30 days before the expiration of the term of office of the last holder of that particular office. The implication is that we are under a constitutional obligation to conduct the election in Edo State on or before the 13th day of October 2020. Now, the commission does not have legislative powers, and we don't have the right to trespass into legislative area. And if we do not conduct these elections on the dates set out, the implication is that the commission loses the right to conduct those elections because, one, we cannot expand, we cannot add, we cannot subtract from the dates and time provided by the Constitution. When the Constitution makes a provision in relation to dates and embeds it within the ambit of the Constitution, no individual can shift those days. It's like the Mount of Gibraltar or Mount Zion that cannot be moved. So we cannot move those days and we cannot discuss those days.
But
we can only...
But Mr. Okoye, apologies. Just a moment. Yes. Apologies if I'm to butt into it. Some people who argue that we are in a health emergency. And the Constitution also provides that in an emergency situation such as this, that situation cannot remain the same.
No, what our own bit, our own mandate is to conduct election based on the provisions of the Constitution. If the country is in a health emergency and it is impossible to conduct elections under a health emergency, the Constitution has given a different organ of government that power to make a determination that there's a health emergency, in which case they will make that particular determination that there's a health emergency and the presidency and the National Assembly will deal with it. Our own business is to conform to the provisions of the Constitution, and we are going to proceed with this election because we believe that we can pull off with this election. All right.
Let's hear from Dr. Sam Amadi. Let's switch to our Abuja studio. Don't forget, everyone, that we also have our audience seated there in our Abuja studio, distinguished audience there who are going to be participating at some point on the program. Thank you for your patience and your participation on the program, our audience in our Abuja studio. But Dr. Sam Amadi, let's bring you into the conversation. Do you agree with what Mr. Okoye said, that in a health emergency such as this, first and foremost, because I want us to tackle that, because if Mr. Okoye is saying that their own is to conduct elections, what about the rights of the citizens, the health of the citizen? Does the Constitution preempt this kind of situation?
Thank you very much. I think first is, let's start with the case definition. It says it's not INEC that declares whether there's a pandemic. That has been declared by the president, invoking the Quarantine Act. But what didn't happen? The Quarantine Act has limited application because it relates to first saying that we have a pandemic, an area of infection, and then subsidiary authorizations, directions on what to do. It did not pronounce an emergency. So INEC had two options. First option, arising from Section 305 of the Constitution, was perhaps to convince the president to declare a national emergency. Now, emergency does not require, in the constitutional language, a dismantling of the political infrastructure or setup. It simply requires that the president make a declaration and authorizes certain degree of constriction. One of those will be that the constitutional requirement of election in those states cannot be superseded. The Constitution allows that. I have a difference, a difference of view with Okoye as regards Section 179. But let me come to the second option. The second option is also that INEC triggers Section 26(2) of the Electoral Act, which requires INEC, I think in Section 2 or 3, E or F, that INEC can refuse to postpone an election when there are certain emergencies. And part of it is pandemic. Pandemic, including health or financial crisis, is one of the allowed occurrences that INEC, as a regulator, based on fact and law, can come to the opinion that this circumstance presents itself as an emergency that we can't conduct the election. The third option is the one INEC chose, which is to continue to go with the election, observing social distance and other health protocol associated with COVID-19. Now, each of these options have cost benefits, and I think INEC was more cautious to look at, because you can also argue and go to court, it's unpredictable what the judicial outcome will be. And so what INEC did was to choose an option that perhaps looks less controversial legally, but the downside of it is that it does two things. It weakens the democratic quotient of this election, arguably, because campaigns are part of the election. So it's not just about wear a face mask and go and thumbprint and leave the place. The whole process culminating in voting and counting constitutes really the quality of elections. You're looking at electoral democracy. So many have argued that perhaps elections are not really as important as governance. But I think in this context, INEC looked at probably considered that less important. Another point is that it's arguable, like the medical doctor has spoken earlier, that these protocols may still not be sufficient, as we are not yet sure how the virus is building up. We're not yet at the stage of flattening down the curve, so that you have also the shortcoming of health or aggravating the health condition. But specifically, I think INEC's guideline raises two critical issues I think we should address. First is the issue around INEC paying too much attention on by-elections arising from the failure both of legislation and legal jurisprudence of the courts. And at this point, I think we should have INEC be given the power. INEC itself should see itself as a regulator. The fact that INEC should play more like a passive role in elections is what has created too much caseload. Ultimately, INEC report shows that.
All right, Dr. Sam Mamadi, apologies. Let me quickly butt in. Because of our time, let's bring in, we have a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Femi Falana is with us. It's on our virtual space here with us this evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Femi Falana, for joining us tonight. We also have, I understand now, that the governor of Ondo State is virtually also with us on the program, but we'll soon come to it. Let's look to the legal issues, Mr. Falana. Your biggest fear out of all of the policies that INEC has listed here, do you have any concern, Mr. Falana? Mr. Falana, I see that you have your earpiece now with you. Do you have any fears as regarding the policy that INEC has put up for this election?
Yes, for sure. And that has to do with the fact that we are conducting this election. Yes?
All right. Let's take a breather. Just a moment, Mr. Falana. Let's take a breather. But when we come back, we hear from Mr. Falana. We got the governor of Edo State to give a pass mark that election can go on. We hear from the governor of Ondo State also whether things are all right in Ondo State for the conduct of the elections. And we'll also look at where elections have held within this coronavirus period and how they did it, a comparative analysis of that. That's going to be next. Join us again, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome back to the Conducting Election in a COVID Period Town Hall, supported by IAGA Africa. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Let's get back to the conversation. We're trying to bring in Mr. Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, to get his view on some of the legal issues. Mr. Falana, it's good to see you. If you can hear me, and if the audio is right now, give us your thought about the legal issues as far as the policy that INEC released on conducting elections in the COVID-19 era?
Well, number one, the elections that are coming up are not issue-based as required by Section 224 of the Constitution, which provides that the program as well as the aims and objects of a political party in Nigeria shall conform with the provisions of Chapter 2 of the Constitution. That is, the fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy. The right of our people to security, to welfare, to education, to health, and enjoyment, pension and the rest of them. Now, none of the political parties is currently addressing this problem. So INEC has to go back to the drawing table and ensure that elections that are coming up are issue-based. Secondly, this election has to take place because Section 105 of the Constitution allows postponement of election from time to time, but no more than 6 months, if the country is physically involved in a war. It's rather controversial, it's disputable whether we can say we are fighting a war, even though a country like the United States of America has lost over 100,000 people. So we may say we are not fighting a war, as was the case in 2015 when the election was postponed because of the crisis in the Northeast zone. But coming to some of the issues raised, if the INEC insists that every voter must wear a face mask, that is part of the guidelines issued by INEC pursuant to Section 160 of the Constitution. We must now go beyond the guidelines to make the guideline work. We can't rely on churches and NGOs to carry out the responsibility of the government. And contrary to what the INEC commissioner said, we're not talking of hundreds of millions of naira here. If you are going to, and I do not expect that in Ondo State or Edo State, you are going to have more than 500 voters in each of the states. It's not possible under the current situation. Now, if you are going to make 500,000 face masks, we are not talking of 400 naira per one or 300. It's possible to talk of 200 naira because the higher the quality, the number that you want to make, the lower the price. So we may just be talking of about 100,000 naira, not millions of naira. And so why should that be difficult for INEC to provide? Because the elite must appreciate that many of our people are undergoing excruciating poverty. There are people who cannot afford a mask of a face mask of 300 naira or 400 naira. So we must provide for them. The other point, we must appreciate that electioneering will soon commence. Rallies are going to be held. How are we going to ensure that these rallies will be peaceful? Having regard to the tensions that is already ongoing in the two states where the ruling parties are up in arms, against each other. And I'm talking of the political class in each of the two states. The other one will fast some elections. Yes, you are right. So you are right that we have fast some elections. But what type of elections? You had the local government election in Cross River State and Benue State last Saturday. Now, the opposition did not participate because the opposition will have been wasting its funds by participating. In Cross River State, for instance, the 18 chairmanship seats were won by the PDP, while the 196 councillorship seats were won by the ruling party. Ditto for Benue, where 23 chairmanship seats were won by the PDP. And of course, the 276 councillorship seats were won by the ruling party. But it's going to be different in Ondo and those states, where you are talking of opposition political parties slugging it out with the ruling parties. And so tension will be high. You will need maximum security to guarantee law and order in both states.
Yeah.
And then you also will need to monitor some of the political leaders in those two states. These are the legal implications.
Great.
The election will hold, no doubt, but the turnout will be extremely low.
Wow. What a projection. We need to move. We still have several portions of this conversation that we need to move quickly to. We want to make some comparison. Where are those places where elections have held? What did they do differently? Let me bring in some of those who will be part of the conversation from our Abuja studio. Dr. Sise Befon will be joining us now on our virtual space, and Idayat Hassan, she's the CEO of the CDD and Election Observer. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Also, Eman Thiel, International Federation of Electoral System, IFES, and Wilson Manji, European Center for Electoral Support. She's the election administration expert. Thank you so much in our Abuja studio. So let's quickly go through some of the information that we have and look at some of the places where these elections have held. First, in Benin Republic. Another place is Burundi. In Guinea, in Mali, in Zimbabwe, elections are being planned in this period. Let me begin perhaps with Idayat Hassan. Idayat, what are your views about the experience that we can share in Nigeria from all of these places that elections have held?
I think that it's an opportunity. It's the health of democracy and the health of the citizens. But it's very important that elections are actually held because this pandemic is expected to last at least 2 years, really. But 3 critical things have actually played out where elections have held beyond Africa, but in different parts of the world where it's held. One is the citizens themselves who are ready to observe the protocols. 2 will be the political actors. Will the political lives of these actors be more important than the lives of our citizens? And thirdly, of course, is those protocols that the election management body will be introducing and how well they are going to be implementing it in conjunction. So this is the stakeholders' affair. It's not just the affair of the Independent National Electoral Commission. Now, importantly, in Mali, Guinea elections and Benin, which I'm actually acquainted with, the turnout was quite low, but they actually used most of those protocols. Maybe we shouldn't be using them as the very best example, but at least in Mali, they wore the face masks, even the observer groups, they wore the hand gloves, and they tried to do social distancing. Not also that these elections were organized were organized ahead of the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic in those countries. So it was not really like aggravated. While Benin, of course, had shut down several parts of the country and they've been able to contain the pandemic. But when you look at places like France, which I believe my colleagues from IFES will be talking about, and South Korea, where we've had the best example so far. So when you look at the municipal election in France, they had a 10% reduction in votes. But what is important is that with South Korea, they had an increase in turnout. But what did they do differently?
All right, Idayat, just for a moment.
Basically, I think these 3 ideas.
Okay.
But applying the protocol and the social distancing and being inclusive in all ramifications. So the voters, of course, wore their mask, they wore their gloves, they sanitized, and they voted. Anybody with temperature over 37 degrees was asked to vote separately. They did not just turn them away, but they made special provisions for them to vote. And immediately they finished voting, they desanitized that venue. Then other people can vote.
Ms. Hassan, just a moment.
Of the votes
sorry to butt in. Ms. Hassan.
To that day. of voting.
All right. Ms. Hassan, just a moment. Let me bring in Herman Thiel, who is the country director of IFES. Herman, give us your view on some of these areas and the Nigerian template. What are your views?
First of all, I must congratulate the INEC for the policy that they have put in place. I have just today received several requests from people around the world to get copies of this policy, because we believe that the INEC has gone and has thoroughly considered all the various aspects that need to be kept in mind when you go ahead with elections. But that said, one of the most important aspects is that citizens need to have confidence in the process. They need to have confidence that this will actually be in place. So one of the key elements is good communication with all the stakeholders throughout the process. And that is what we've seen in the places where it has been successfully conducted, like South Korea. The INEC's provisions make many references to policies that still need to be put in place and work that still needs to be done in terms of revising the regulations, in terms of the procedures and policies. And the whole world is at the moment revising what is happening. Every country in the world that has elections coming up, there are elections coming up very soon in Serbia, there are elections coming up in North Macedonia, in lots of different places, and each country is revising these policies and looking at what each other are doing. And I do think that Nigeria is playing a very, very important role in very early on in the process, starting to engage the issues, and that can become a template that can be used in other countries, especially in Africa, but elsewhere in the world as well,
right, Herman,
if that is done well.
Yeah, thanks for your views there. Let's bring in Francis Madugu and get his views on Mr. Madugu. Give us your view on what INEC has put in place so far compared to what we've seen in some other countries of the world. Mr. Madugu.
All right, thank you very much for this opportunity. But basically, just to follow up what Herman said, basically what INEC has done this time around is to lay out a policy brief, and clearly in the documents they have also said that a lot of follow-up conversations and other documents and guidelines will come up from this. So as simple as engaging the different stakeholders, clearly the policy document speaks to that. Clearly engaging the different political parties, or rather the political class, the document speaks to that. Using technologies to improve the process, the document speaks to that. And then also, better still, actively engaging the NCDC or the Ministry of Health, the policy document speaks to that. Clearly, you can see that the INEC clearly is consulting and engaging widely. Then just also to follow up on what Herman had said, the whole essence of elections is for stakeholders, or better still for citizens to engage. Definitely, this is going to be the collective process and collective involvement of all the different stakeholders involved. And so the different stakeholders, just as this conversation is taking place, all different stakeholders in Edo State, in Ondo State, and even states where by elections are going to take place, all need to come together and clearly highlight what the objectives and how they want to go about with these elections will be held. And then also citizens. The whole essence of this is for citizens. Citizens need to understand the process. And so clearly, even alongside with this document, it has to come with robust voter education, robust citizens awareness, robust citizens information. And better still, as a country, we have other instruments we have other government agencies that can also support and engage in ensuring that the message is out there. But clearly, one thing that is obvious is that messaging on these elections, messaging on participation cannot be left to only INEC alone. The different actors, the different stakeholders all have to come in and support. The messaging on voter education, the messaging on citizens engaging has to be in the state. So when INEC complements and INEC conducts these elections, or better still, INEC's activities, the citizens know what to do, the citizens know what to expect. So by and large, NCDC Ministry of Health, and all the different stakeholders need to come together, and clearly the documents is a good pointer to what the objectives of
Mr. Madugo, I guess it's a good point for us because we need to move quickly. But Mr. Arogunade and Prof, I need to get a few seconds of your reaction to this because this is a very important one. We need to learn from other countries and other places where elections have held. Quickly, let me begin with you, Mr. Arogunade. Your views on some of places where elections held.
Well, I think we have examples to learn from. So it's good that we have these reference points, South Korea and the rest of them. But again, you cannot completely replicate the experience elsewhere in your own country. And that is why it will be good for INEC to take into consideration some of the issues being raised over this policy. I feel that one area that INEC needs to pay attention to is that of security. Because if you look at the policy, the threshold of voting has actually changed. They are saying that instead of the normal 500 people per unit, you are likely to have 750, and in some instances, 1,250 people voting, because it's a way of collapsing the units. So the question of the management of the process by the security agencies, the engagement with them becomes very important. And I still want to revisit the question of face mask along the lines that Mr. Femi Falana spoke. Ideally, it should be ideal, and I think INEC should look at this possibility and not rule it out. And I say that advisedly because if you look at the Electoral Acts, I think in section 102, it says that state apparatus, including the media, shall not be used to the advantage or disadvantage of a political party.
All right.
So in a state where you have an incumbent running and they are saying they want to provide face masks, that could actually compromise the process. And I should also quickly mention that INEC needs to look at section 9 of this policy where it talked about political parties and election observation. The media is not mentioned. I would have liked that section to be titled political parties, election observation, and the media, because we know what journalists go through during the election period. So I think the guidelines should be clear, should be specific about the role of the media to avoid the kind of harassment that the journalists face during election time, and they're even facing under this COVID-19.
Well said, Mr. Arogunade. Prof, your view on this? A quick one.
Briefly, I think we need to look at voting during pandemic in the context of our political environment. In other places where they've held elections during this pandemic, two things have come out clearly. One, there has not been an abuse of the power of incumbency, this abuse of state power to favor a ruling party. I think that is still a major issue that we have to face. I think it's very, very important. Number two, citizens are active in protecting their mandates. They come out determined to protect their mandate. No matter how much security people you put out, we know what security forces do in this country. So citizens must themselves own that process and take the initiative away from the political parties because they want to undermine the process. So we as citizens, just as the way we protect ourselves in terms of neighborhood watch, we must also protect the electoral process by coming out, making sure that those who want to disrupt are not allowed to disrupt. We know those who disrupt elections because they live among us. And if they see people from the community who are there to protect the vote, they will not do what they are doing. The security forces are just there to make money themselves.
All right. So let's now switch gears now and talk about the very big one, which is the election day voting. We'll be talking about security issues, the voting on election, and how the conduct will be done. Let me introduce you to Mr. Wilson Manji. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Cynthia Mbamalu also joins us from our Abuja studio, and the representative of the IG of Police, the Inspector General of Police, Mr. Benson Olugbo, also Mr. Jackie Pele also joins us from our Abuja studio. Perhaps let me begin with Mr. Wilson Manji. If you can give us your view on the election day voting, whether or not INEC sufficiently catered for safety of Nigerians or voters on election day. Your views.
Thank you, Sean, for that question. And of course, I join my voice to say very big congratulations to INEC for the policy on conduct of voting amidst COVID-19. Importantly, like my colleagues have also mentioned, there is no one-size-fits-all solution towards the conduct of election at this particular time. So for INEC, the policy, of course, has made broad recommendations on what the Electoral Commission would be undertaking on election day. And of course, if these requirements are followed duly by citizens, then of course we would be able to see a situation where these elections will be conducted. But of course, whether the election is going to generate more electorate's participation or contribute towards voters' apathy, that will be entirely up to how the situation unfolds come September and October when these elections are due. Of course, the decontamination of the polling centers are good provisions in the policy. The issue of course, washing of hands and ensuring that the card readers are cleaned the surfaces with the reagents are also very good provisions to ensure that citizens are contracting this virus in the process eliminated.
So maybe let's speak to Mr. Benson Olubo, who is representing the Inspector General of Police. That's another major issue there on election day. A lot of people are always having the fears whether or not to come out. Mr. Olubo, what are your views if you have studied the INEC policy vis-a-vis your responsibility as police authorities on the policy of INEC? All right, I guess we'll bring in Mr. Olubo, but let me go online, and if Esther Uzoma is with us online, so we can bring Esther back into the conversation. Esther Uzoma, she is a member of the election situation room. I'm not sure Esther is here with us. But Mr. Okoye, let's bring you back into the conversation. Mr. Okoye, give us your views. You've heard what the fears of a lot of people who have spoken tonight about the lessons from other places. Any lesson for INEC that you can pick up quickly?
Well, we have a slightly peculiar environment, and this policy speaks to our own peculiar environment. We drew lessons from previous elections, and we also drew lessons from some of the guidelines and protocols that have been rolled out by the health authorities. So what we are doing is that as we move on, we are going to also harvest views from different stakeholders. And the Commission has also said that we are going to use a small by-election as a test run before we get to the governorship elections. So that if there are adjustments to be made, we are going to make those adjustments. But you see, this is just a broad policy. The regulations and the guidelines and the manuals that we lead into this election, and we are going to go into these elections with, will all be ready this week, and we'll be ready to go. What is remaining and what is important and what is fundamental is the citizens' engagement with this particular process. Because, as I pointed out, the Constitution has already circumscribed the period for the conduct of this particular election. And if we do not conduct these elections within the constitutional window, we lose the mandate and we lose the power to fix the date of election. It now devolves to local authorities.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Okoye, let's take another break. And when we come back, the issues of primaries are there. What are the views of political parties on this process? We get other views when we come back from this break, everyone. Join us again. You're still watching the nation's news leader channels television, and this is a town hall on conducting elections in a COVID-19 period. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us in these 2-hour telecasts. Thank you so much. It's a hybrid production because we're having guests on our virtual space and, of course, in our Abuja and Lagos studio. Let me quickly introduce our guest to us and we get back into the conversation. Yemi Adamalekun, CEO of Enough is Enough, is here with us. Mr. David Ayele, thank you so much for coming on. And let's go to our Abuja studio. I can see Mr. Jackie Perle. Cynthia Mbamalu is there. Mr. Ben is there. Also, Mr. Don, the representative of the IG of police, are all seated. Where do we begin from? Let me begin from the man in the uniform so that we can be safe during this election. Mr. Don, if you can give us your view, if you've studied the INEC policy, is it inclusive enough to accommodate the issues of security?
Thank you, Seun. Let me start this way. Since 1923, the police remain the constant denominator and facilitator of
successful democratic elections in Nigeria. INEC, the midwife of elections in this country, issued a policy document on the 21st of May, and in accordance to COVID-19 protocols. And that policy document will guide election in Nigeria from the police perspective. The police and other friendly forces have classified the election into 3 phases: pre-election, election proper, and post-election. In this respect, we are going to provide adequate security, which we have been providing all these years. And in accordance to Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 principles. The forthcoming elections in Ondo and Edo states are very unique in many respects, especially because of the public health concern, and secondly, because it's an off-season election. And the police were always prepared, and we are going to police this election in accordance to community policing principles as enunciated by the Inspector General of Police in various fora.
All right, so let me get a few seconds from you. The issues of vote buying was very big. A lot of people have raised questions about how some of these paraphernalia that INEC has said is a must, how they will be provided, and vote buying will not happen. Have you envisaged that kind of situation, Mr. Awuna?
Thank you very much. You see, vote buying is a very complex issue. Is that election venue, before election, at their homes? But as police officers, we are bound to arrest people we see in our view committing any electoral offenses, particularly on the election day. So the vote buying, as I say, is very complex, and the argument on the platform of debates and political discourse is different. As for the police, we're well equipped, our men have been trained, and we're discussing at both the state and national level as to what to do about vote buying. But what is principle and what is we are concerned about is about security, provision of security and protection of lives and property. Because you must see the election from the stakeholders' approach and collective responsibility. If election must succeed in this country, it's all of us. It's not police alone in all other democracies. So you must see it from the point of view of stakeholders' election. Who are those buying votes, and who are those who should buy votes, and who are those sponsoring vote buying? It's not just the police alone to stand, because the police responsibilities is governed by INEC policies and other extant laws.
All right. So let's bring in Mr. Benson Olugbo. Mr. Olugbo, your views on some of these policies of INEC on the issues of the election, the voting day itself. Any fears as regarding the policy, the framework from INEC?
Thank you, Shegun, for having me. I think we have some worries in the sense that it is not really very clear how security agencies will operate on that day. And there is no policy now that actually talks how to police elections under a pandemic by security agencies. What is currently happening, especially under the current COVID-19 pandemic, is something that is also worrisome, because we have seen instances where government did a lockdown and said there shouldn't be any interstate travel. Unfortunately, those interstate travels are still taking place, and people will tell you that if you have money in your pocket, you can actually move from Abuja to Lagos or from Abuja to Benin or any part of the country. Secondly, INEC is also trying to restrict the number of individuals who can vote now, because the issue of not having a face mask, if you don't have a face mask, then they will not allow you to vote, can actually create more problems, because that, to an extent, can also allow security agencies actually to stop individuals. And probably now, unfortunately, for some of the bad eggs in their midst, and I stop people who may not have the face mask before they're allowed to go. And there's also the problem. You know, the regulation talks about people who should be within the inner circle of election, and those who should be outside outer circle, and those who should be around when the voting is taking place and when the counting is taking place. But it is still not very clear how many security agencies will be within the place where the voting will take place, and then would they be armed? And then in terms of those who will be outside the security, the periphery of the election,
We don't know whether they will be armed or not. They will not be armed. And there have been instances, really, where genuine voters have had problems voting. And we've also seen circumstances and situations where thugs were actually allowed to have a field day, unfortunately. So the question is, what is the policy of security agencies in policing an election under a pandemic? I've not seen that policy, and the INEC guidelines, the new guidelines, does not really say something clearly about this. And I think it's something that should really be looked at, because I think even though the representative of the IG has talked about community policing, we know that the procedure is still evolving. A lot of Nigerians still don't understand the community policing structure and whether the difference actually between community policing and state police, because there's also a confusion by several people, even in the states, whether community policing is the same thing as state police, which of course we know is different. So as we discuss the INEC guidelines, which for everybody has agreed is a step in the direction, there is need to be clear on what is the role of security agencies. Will it change? And how would they police an election during a pandemic? Because there are now different layers of accountability and also different layers that citizens can easily be disenfranchised because of the pandemic.
All right. Cynthia Mbamalu from Yaga, she's usually heading the watching the vote process at Yaga. Cynthia, you are always coming up with pre-election, election, and post-election reports. Do you fear there might be some people who might be disenfranchised in this election? Do you foresee any kind of voter apathy?
Thank you, Sheun. Actually, if you follow the conversation this evening, there are projections that there would be possible low voter turnout in these elections. And what is important for these elections held in very extraordinary times is that we need extraordinary measures to inspire confidence, one, and to promote inclusion in the electoral process. And if you look at the the guidelines released by the Electoral Commission, the question would be how comprehensive is it in inspiring confidence in voters? One, and how does it ensure inclusion of all sectors of the society? And I'll look at it from different angles. On elections, look at the voting process itself. The conversations around providing, for instance, sanitizers, is a lot of focus on providing that for the electoral officials and less on providing that for the voters. The other question also is on the issue of inclusion, because this time around we're talking about how this impacts on persons living with disabilities who may not have the capacity to provide the face mask that others have. What about pregnant women and nursing mothers? How does it impact on them? And then the voting itself, the time for voting. So if you look at the current guideline, we still have almost the same hours, so 8:30 to 4 p.m. and to 2:30, which is just different from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Now the conversation when it comes to a situation like this, where the time for processing voters, if we want to take into consideration the minimum standards of health to prevent transmission, would also increase. So we cannot operate with the same timing for voting that we used to operate in previous elections when there was no pandemic, especially considering the fact that our history has shown that we always have challenge with late commencement of polls. So a guideline of this nature should also include that consideration on time for voting to ensure that in processing voters, we have every voter who has the right to vote participate in that. So that's the one aspect on inclusion. The other conversation is also on election day workers. And now the guideline has a proposal to even possible limitation on the number of election observers that would be allowed to observe. And also the conversation around media. Let us also realize that when it comes to elections, media and observers play an important role, meaning that policies should also ensure that we do not limit the participation of media practitioners and election observer groups who will be observing on elections day. And then on inspiring confidence. Now, a policy of this nature should be able to attend to those needs that voters care about, meaning that at this point, voter education should have commenced. We shouldn't be waiting to start voter education, because this is the time to begin voter education that should include conversation on how citizens will be protected while voting amidst COVID, and conversation on security, because that is also very critical. Now, with the pandemic, we've seen an increase in human rights abuses or violations by security personnel. Now, if you talk towards the elections, we need to assure citizens that they will be secured for elections. Now, the governor for Edo, for instance, mentioned that community policing and even using vigilante groups may be part of that. Let us not forget, so far, Osun too, the rerun elections in 2018. The thing is, what we do not want to get into situation is a process where the security or even the vigilante groups or forms of community policing that may be adopted would deter participation and inspire confidence for people to come out to participate.
You've eaten into the allotted time that I gave you, Mr. Mbamalu. Thank you so much, Cynthia Mbamalu of Yaga Africa. Let's go to Mr. Jack Pelle. My very good friend, Mr. Pelle. It's good to see you again this evening, Mr. Pelle. Always fighting for inclusion in all of the democratic process. Your view, Mr. Pelle, on INEC policy, is it half empty or half full?
Well, thank you, Shehu, for having me, and thank you, Yaga Africa, for showing the principle of inclusion by making sure that persons with disability is included in this conversation. I want to say that, yes, INEC has presented what I will call an inclusive policy. But what I'm concerned is whether the implementation is going to be inclusive. Taking into consideration some of the issues that were not very clear. Issues like special voting rights for persons with disability, issues like the polling station and the polling environment being accessible. And I think I want to say, Shehu, that as much as INEC is planning to change the architecture of the polling unit, they should also take into consideration changing the architecture of the polling unit to be accessible. I say this times without numbers, that any democracy that is not inclusive is a rape on democracy. And so it is important that INEC must take into consideration whatever it takes to ensure that these two off-cycle elections are inclusive. I was the first, immediately after the chairman presented his address yesterday at the CSO's engagement, to sound the alarm that INEC must take responsibility by going further to provide this facial mask, because the people that will be worst affected are my community. They don't have the money to buy the facial mask. So telling us that we must come there and with a facial mask is a total process. It will set us up and disenfranchise us. So INEC should provide the face mask. They can afford it. Let them go cap in hand, asking development partners, they can help them. Government has enough money to buy face mask. They can afford it. And I think it should be provided free of charge. Anything other than that will totally take my community out of the process. And that will be a very, very, very
Mr. Jack Pelle,
very heart-rending experience for my community.
Mr. Jack Pelle,
we are ready. And also, it's important that development partners, all the institutions that are responsible for election, that they should help us by making sure that persons with disability understands this guideline and be ready to participate. You know, thank God again for Yaga for giving us this opportunity.
Mr. Jack Pelle,
we want more organizations to give us opportunities like this. I'd like to touch on security.
No, Mr. Jack Pelle, we need to
that your community.
We need to go, because we still have some group of people that are here to speak on this platform tonight. Mr. Jack Pelle, let me come to Lagos and let's speak to Mr. David Anyele. Glad to have you. And Yemi Adamalekum of Enough is Enough. We must say enough is enough. Coronavirus, nobody wants it around here. But, I mean, seriously speaking, we have enough problems as regarding how we can secure ballots during the elections. Now, this pandemic has added yet another trouble. Do you foresee any major problem on the hands of INEC on one hand? Mr. Femi Falana is stating that there are no sanctions for the elections. But this pandemic, would it add to the troubles?
Definitely will, but I think I'd just like to really pick up on, because of our limited time. Starting point, I think it would be nice if we see the guidelines as a draft document, because post the release, INEC has already released supplementary guidelines, and as Mr. Okoye said, there'll be more specific regulations. So I think that framing, number one. Number two, security concerns. I think the spokesperson for the police, for me, worries me in the way he spoke, because he was quite dismissive. We already know the challenges we have both right now during the pandemic with security officers, and as Cynthia laid it out. And he's saying, oh, it's elections. Throughout elections, we've already always provide security. So the dismissive nature worries me. It's not INEC's role, I believe. The security agencies themselves must come up with their own policy for with the pandemic. And he didn't even reference the fact that they were working on one and were planning to release one. That worries me. Thirdly, face masks. That has come up over and over and over again. And I really don't understand the big deal. We've seen numerous videos about do-it-yourself face masks. You can use Ankara material at home. We're not talking surgical grade face masks here. The idea is to protect each other as we walk towards a path, so anybody can make face masks at home. So this issue about development partners, INEC providing masks, absolutely, I mean, for me, it's completely a non-issue. It's not INEC's, it should not be added to INEC's responsibility to provide face masks. When you're coming to vote, cover your face, cover your mouth. They do it, NGOs can help with do-it-yourself videos and things of that nature. And lastly, with all these issues, without a shadow of a doubt, I foresee low voter turnout amidst the normal other issues we have with elections, especially in these two states that are already so volatile before we've even started.
Mr. Anyele, is this policy of INEC, is it inclusive for your group?
Yeah, I must commend INEC for providing a guideline. But we must understand that this is a pandemic which is equivalent to emergency. And the National Disability Act in section 25 provide for situation of emergency for people with disabilities. And making it compulsory for people with disabilities to wear face masks sometimes hinders their health, because face masks, constitute a kind of challenge in breathing. And if it constitutes a challenge in breathing, it hinders such individual from being able to participate on an equal basis with others. Therefore, it's important that INEC look at the use of face masks vis-a-vis people with disabilities. Also, issue of priority voting. We've seen over the years that people with disabilities are being, hindered from accessing priority. Recognizing also that the National Disability Act also provides that priority should be given to people with disabilities wherever there are queues. Therefore, we are asking that INEC should, train and retrain their staffs to ensure that priority is given to people with disabilities when they come to vote. You see, we are going to Edo. Edo is a state that has no law that protects people with disabilities. Over the years, people with disabilities have been clamoring that Edo state government should take appropriate measure to ensure that they're not discriminated. So what we are going to see is that people with disabilities may struggle much more than others to participate in this election, thereby, undermining their right to vote on equal basis with others. These are some of the things I project.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adevianyele. It's time for another break on the town hall. But when we come back, you've not heard from mainstream politicians, those who are speaking for their political parties. Well, we are going to the battle ring now, where you find politicians getting serious. This is their tough. We are all in. When we come back from the break, we hear for politicians after now. We're already at the home stretch of this town hall. Let me go to our Abuja studio, where politicians are standing by. There is a non-politician in the mix there. Ezenwa Nwagu is the executive director of Partners for Electoral Reforms. He's not a politician, but beside him is Bishop Amakri. He's the national chairman of the Young Party, and Professor Adeniran is the national chairman of the SDP, and Mr. Muhammad Ibrahim, the deputy organizing secretary of the APC. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We have just a limited time, but your thoughts are very important tonight. Let me begin with you, Mr. Ibrahim. For you, especially the issues of primaries, is your party satisfied? Your party is the ruling party. Is it satisfied with INEC's policy guidelines?
Come again, please.
I'm saying, is the APC satisfied with the guidelines of INEC in conducting this election in the COVID-19 era?
Yeah, well, for every political party, guidelines are being set by INEC. For our own political party, I think this is a receipt yesterday, and we're looking forward to see how our primaries are going to be conducted in line with the guidelines. Furthermore, I think the party is making further arrangements to sustain the pandemic issues in both states that the election is going to be held. We are satisfied and of the belief that the issue of guidelines need to be taken seriously, as security issue involves so much in the guidelines. Much of the things that are there, practically in politics, there are things that will scare people from going into election this time around. So I think the party is further looking at how best it can be able to tackle a lot of issues.
Professor Adeniro, as it stands right now, as a major opposition voice in the country presently, do you think the climate is good enough based on INEC policy for these coming elections?
Well, thank you, Shion. We have studied what INEC has put out. It is comprehensive, but we believe it is not comprehensive enough, because one of the critical areas in electioneering and then in voting and so forth is the security aspect. And we believe that so much work still needs to be done in that area. There is need to look at it closely and ensure that whatever comes out of the process, it has respectability. The second area is this: if INEC goes out in Edo and Ondo and does well, that will lay the foundation for success in future. And it will also point to those who have been afraid of what will be happening in case we use technology. There is no way we can have good elections in this country that will be fair and free and so without introducing technology. And what has happened now is a divine intervention by God. When we have this COVID-19, it is indeed a terrible thing globally. It's a catastrophe. At the same time, it is an equal opportunity pandemic, because why it is telling the government, pay more attention to the health sector. It is also challenging not just our scientists, all institutions, to think outside the box, how to handle situations in such a way that we'll be able to cope with the challenges of the present century. Again, Prof. By the time you look, how do we deal with 84,004 million voters? And of course, we also have 119,000 119,793 polling booths.
Let's get, because we have just less than 2 minutes to the end of the this town hall. Let's get Mr. Bishop Amakri of the Young Democratic Party here. For you, Bishop Amakri, is everything all right from your party's point of view? We just have less than 2 minutes, and we need to get Mr. Enwagu to come in.
Well, Sean, first, actually, I think we need to bring forth the spirit of patriotism in everything we do, because for me, health is key. The only problem we have now, honestly speaking, I would have said this is an opportunity, because the COVID-19 pandemic has provoked a conversation where stakeholders will come, meet, and discuss and chart a way forward, how we can build an egalitarian society. But the problem with the COVID-19 is that people are really losing lives, and actually it's not anything to welcome about. But however, INEC actually has, they are stuck with the provisions of the law that they must conduct this election. But however, the policy they have unveiled, I think that, like my elder brother have said, my colleague have said, the security should be touched, and indeed I'm concerned, I'm worried with that area.
We need to go now because of our time.
We must give priority to security.
Let me bring Mr. Enwagu. He will be the one to give us the closing and the final word on the program. For those who are planning to conduct direct and indirect primaries, can we afford not to consider this health issue in the conduct of primaries? Just a few seconds before we go.
Well, Shehu, I think it's important to understand that election is not a call to martyrdom. If it's not a call to martyrdom, then what we need to quickly do is to scale up our law and order regime. If you have a weak law and order regime, and then the challenges that our election have will not disappear because of a pandemic. The health challenges had been posed on it. But the big issue in all of that is whether you institute a protocol or you institute a guideline, if the law and order regime is weak in terms of the ability to enforce those protocols, then you are going to have a big challenge with you on your hand. So a bigger, wider conversation needs to take place. The Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security needs to expand to accommodate the NCDC. The NCDC needs to get into that election interagency consultative committee to be able to help them to understand what they need to do to be able to secure.
Yeah, it's a very good point for us to round up tonight. I must sincerely thank everyone tonight that has been part of this town hall. What a conversation it's been for the nation and for everyone who has watched. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Many thanks to Yaga Africa for putting things together, and Channels Television for this platform. On behalf of the team right here at Channels Television, bye-bye everyone.